Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime Archaeology Workshop from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. I'm Justin McKeel. I'm one of the archaeologists at the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office. The topic today is Quarries, Forts, and Beyond, the Archaeological Conservancy's preservation efforts in Pennsylvania. And with us is Kelley Berliner. Kelley currently serves as the Eastern Regional Director for the Archaeological Conservancy. She has a BA in anthropology from the University of Toronto and an MA in historical archaeology from the College of William and Mary. Her interests include public archaeology, community engagement, preservation, and archaeology of the northeastern United States and Canada. For the past 45 years, the Archaeological Conservancy has been the only national nonprofit organization dedicated to the permanent preservation of archaeological sites across the country. The sites contained in these preserves range in diversity from some of the earliest known Paleoindian sites to 20th century industrial complexes. In today's presentation, Kelley will highlight the Conservancy's efforts in Pennsylvania and some of these sites that they have protected. So welcome, Kelley, and thank you for presenting today's program.
Great. Thanks so much, Justin.
So while you set up your presentation, let me remind the audience to submit any questions about today's topic in the Q&A feature, and Kelley will answer them after the presentation is complete. And so, Kelley, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Wonderful. Let's get everything queued up here. Okay, great. Thank you all again for having me here today. I'm really excited to share a little bit about the Conservancy's work in Pennsylvania. And so we'll be covering everything from quarries to forts and beyond. And what I hope to do is talk a little bit about how the Archaeological Conservancy works and then close out with some information on some of the sites that we've protected in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as one that you can visit. So without further ado, the Archaeological Conservancy is the only national nonprofit organization dedicated to acquiring and preserving archaeological sites. We do this all across the country, and we do it with the support of nearly 20,000 members. So we're really grateful for that strong group of folks. And we've been doing it since 1980, and we're now up to almost 600 sites protected across the country. So we've been doing this for a little while and doing well at it. And so I'm excited to share some of these acquisitions. You'll see some photos on these slides, like here you see Ely Mound. These are different sites that we've protected in the eastern region, just to give you a little bit of eye candy as we go through here. And so I will spare you all the long history of preservation efforts in the United States, going back to the colonial era up through the present, but we'll just share that early on, they were really piecemeal efforts by individuals like Thomas Jefferson or the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And it was very much focused on select sites. Later on, you do get federal legislation like the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, but those are only dealing with archaeological sites that are located on federal lands or projects that involve federal monies or some type of restriction or regulation that requires review. This leaves a very large gap for archaeological sites that are located on private property, like your own backyard. Unless there are local ordinances, those sites generally have no protections. So the Archaeological Conservancy decided to use the power of private property to protect those places and fill that gap. And so we started that in 1980. Now, importantly, those sites are protected, but we make sure they're available for research. So we never permit them to be fully excavated, but we do allow non-invasive research as well as limited excavations, because the idea is that these will be protected long into the future as our technologies get better, so we can continue to learn more from them. So three main things that we do at the Conservancy. The first is we publish American Archaeology magazine. Many of you may be familiar with this. It covers the work that we do, as well as major archaeology-focused stories across the country and down into Central and South America. This is the magazine our membership receives. We provide archaeological tours. This gives us a chance to raise a bit of money, spread our mission, and also highlight the work that our colleagues are doing, particularly in our own regions. So Here in the East, we offer tours that look at Chesapeake archaeology, the French and Indian War. We spend some time in Pennsylvania for that one, Iroquois, Ontario, and Quebec. And then, of course, we offer these tours all across the country and then into Central and South America as well. Our focus is really archaeology, so we try to get people behind the scenes to learn a little bit more about how archaeologists are working in these different topics. And then most important, and what I'll mostly be talking about today, is preserving and managing archaeological sites. We do this through 5 regions. Our Southwest region is the largest, and that's where we originated. We are now based in Albuquerque, and this is where in the 1960s, 70s, of course, earlier as well, there was a lot of looting happening at sites. Archaeological sites are very visible. Think of above ground Pueblo style ruins. And so that's where we really spent a lot of our focus. The Eastern region, which I know is our smallest, but I feel it's more than enough to cover, it came later, and probably, I think it's been about 25 years now that we've worked in the Eastern region. Part of the challenge is many people think of the East as looking like this, right? They imagine the developed parts of New Jersey, Manhattan, huge industrial developments, big cities. But of course, we all know that's just not how the entire East is. Our archaeology just looks different out here. We don't have as much above ground preservation. It's much more humid and damp, so we don't have the same types of sites that you see in the Southwest or the same types of preservation. But of course, archaeology is still very much here, ranging through all the different time periods. We just have to look a little bit harder for it. And in the 25 years we've been operating here in the East, we've protected right around 90 different archaeological sites. So you can see these range down from Maine down through North Carolina in different concentrations. We try to have a broad focus especially with territory to have a good representation of sites, but we also just have to go where the sites are. So how do we do this? Well, the short answer is any way we can. We start with finding them. And we do this by working with archaeologists, whether they're connected to universities or independent researchers, amateur archaeologists. We approach CRM firms, state, tribal offices, and sometimes we're doing our own research. So I'm going into archives, going through old site files, looking at publications, and in some cases doing limited archaeological testing to confirm the boundaries of a site or if a site is even present. So this gives us a good starting point of sites that we would maybe consider. And I'll say that here in the Eastern region, I have give or take 1,000 site files for all the different states where I operate. So we can always go through those and revisit them to see if something has changed or if it's a site we really should focus on. Now, of course, not all of those sites are perfect fits, and I won't go through our criteria in detail because they're generally very flexible. The most important thing is that the site needs to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. It does not have to be listed, it just has to be eligible. So many archaeological sites, as long as they have research potential and some type of intact stratigraphy, meaning it's not all churned up and destroyed, has the potential to be eligible under criterion D for informing us about the past through archaeology. So that's our biggest thing. Otherwise, there are many variables. These criteria, as well as other general property acquisition elements, right? We have to think about things like, is there much site left? How do we get to the property? Who owns it? Are there other problems? Are there ethical issues? Is there a descendant community? Is it very threatened? And then really, really important is the owner's attitude, right? Are they interested in talking to us? Are they interested in learning about archaeology? Or is it a flat out, no, I don't want to know anything about this? And then, of course, price. So we're really balancing archaeological interest with the world of real estate. So it has an interesting nexus of these two things. Now, a lot of the time we're thinking about threats to sites because we're trying to prioritize sites that are more heavily threatened to get to them first. Here in the East, our largest threat as many of you maybe have seen or experienced, is development, whether it's housing, industrial, in particular around cities where we see sprawl. Those are the sites that we're really trying to get to first. But of course, there are other threats, mining, different quarrying operations. There is some illegal looting of artifacts in the East, not as bad as in the Southwest. And then there are natural threats like erosion, which tend to lead us away from sites that are located along the coast, for example. They tend to be quite expensive, they're eroding, and we usually recommend that those should be excavated more quickly as a threatened site as opposed to preserved for long term, because we just don't know how long it will be there. But if we're able to get through all of that, we have a willing property owner and it's a good fit, we move towards acquisition. And this can happen in one of three ways. We can do a fair market purchase where we're buying at the highest and best use appraised value, generally kind of expensive here in the East. So this is usually a better option when we have some funding, public grant funding or private funding. Ideally, though, we're getting donations. Usually, this is less feasible for a private property owner that has a lot of wealth in their land, and more so is something that we see from developers who maybe have to do some archaeological testing before development and then choose to preserve a site in place as opposed to fully excavating it, which can be very costly. But they can donate it to us, we protect it, we offer a tax benefit. And then we have an in-between option, a bargain sale to charity, where we're purchasing land below the appraised value. So there's some tax benefit to the seller, and we don't have to pay the full price. So again, it just depends on the specific deal, the specific person we're working with. Each different acquisition is different. So that can take a while for us to get through. Some projects move as quickly as a couple of months, but we have some that we have worked on for 20 years and longer, just keeping in touch with property owners or being a part of a big development project and just waiting until the timing is right for things to happen. Now, once we get to that acquisition, we close on a property, the work is hardly done. We then have to manage these sites, and that involves a lot of different steps. So, as I said, each site is unique. They require their own types of management. So, we develop plans for this. We look at stabilization, any protection measures. Do we need fencing? Do we need to bring in filter? Do we have to do surface collection? And then, depending on what the finished property will be maintained to present as, determines what additional work we might have to do. So most conservancy properties are not open to the public. They're open for educational purposes or specific special requests or research, but they're not designed for regular public access. They don't have amenities, they don't have trails, and there's not much to see, right? Especially here in the East. They look like fields and woods. But we do have some that, with the help of local partners, we are able to maintain as open to the public. So they might have trails or signage, but that's a very different type of management. Now, beyond that, we're also sure to make sure we have these sites accessible to descendant communities for ceremonial purposes. And then we do have to review research requests as they come in. And sometimes we divest property, not often, but occasionally to a federal or a state partner. Usually if we own something that's next to a state park and they have an interest in it. But for the most part, we're acquiring these with the idea that we're holding them in perpetuity. Okay, so that's how we do it. What types of sites are we dealing with here in the East? As I said, we've got 90 properties. We've got 17 of these in Pennsylvania. So there's a good chance we've got one that's in your own backyard or not too terribly far from it. And they range across the whole cultural timeline. So I'll start by going through some of the pre-contact and historic Native American sites that we acquire. Again, I know not all of these sites are in Pennsylvania that you'll see up on the slides here, but I'm trying to highlight some that are either we have research going on or fairly well-known sites. So like the Barton Preserve, we just did some research out there focusing on the Paleoindian component, but I promise I've got some Pennsylvania sites in here as well. So looking at these pre-contact sites, let's just go through a quick cultural timeline. we focus a lot on these early Paleoindian sites. This is the time period dating back more than 10,000 years ago when people are first settling in the eastern part of this country. So we're dealing with glaciation, we're dealing with small groups of people who are highly mobile, they're big game hunters, and this makes the archaeological sites pretty difficult to find, right? The landscape has changed a lot. And these are not people who are staying in one place for a terribly long period. So the sites can be very ephemeral, they can be very hard to find, but we do know we have a record of them here in the East. So we're often looking at sites where maybe processing was happening for hides or hunting camps, things like that nature. And this is where we get those notorious fluted points, right? We're looking at stone technologies. That's usually the type of cultural assemblage and the artifacts we're getting from these sites. From there, we move into archaic period sites. So this is a time period where the climate is changing as the glaciers retreat, and we're seeing vegetation change drastically, right? We're having more hardwood forest come in, and what we see is people adapting their toolkits during this time period to get the most out of those new resources. So we're seeing more diversity in tools, so we're finding different types of artifacts. And people are still highly mobile, but they might be returning to one place more and more frequently. So we have protected a lot of sites along major waterways where people would have had a really good steady supply of aquatic resources for fishing and things like that. So again, we do get larger archaic sites where people are coming back, but it still is seasonal movement and people are still moving to follow game and things of that nature. Now, the bulk of pre-contact sites that we've protected date to the woodland period. If you're interested in archaeology, my guess is these are the types of pre-contact sites you most commonly think about. And that makes sense. It's because there are more of them, they have more stuff, and they fit more so our imagination when we think, oh, pre-contact, we think bow and arrow, we think clay ceramics. These are actually all technologies that are coming in fairly late in the timeline for pre-contact peoples. But this is, again, people are becoming more sedentary. They're farming, they're staying in one place a lot longer, still maybe moving every so many years, and they're creating more cultural material, which then translates into more artifacts, right? There's more stuff to throw away when you're making ceramic pots and things like that. So there is a much more dense number of artifacts on these sites, which also makes them easier to find and record. So we've protected quite a large number of these. In Pennsylvania, in particular, a lot of these are Monongahela cultural sites. So out towards the western part of the state, around Pittsburgh area, and we're really excited that we have worked with the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, who has run regular field schools, and in particular at the Squirrel Hill site in New Florence, to try to understand the Monongahela peoples better and how they were interacting with one another and then with broader influences from around the region. So we've done, I think, a pretty solid job protecting some of these sites in the western part of the state. And then from that woodland period, so right before European contact and arrival, we move into the contact period. So this does vary as you have Europeans coming into the country, and then also really importantly, European goods, right, which are also or generally coming in prior to the actual European people themselves. So we're seeing a lot of changes, right? Interactions between these populations, positive and negative, and increase in the fur trade and an emphasis on trying to get some of these goods, in particular metal goods. And then we also have the downsides, right? We have a lot of European disease, totally decimating populations, war and conflicts, and then ultimately the westward movement and pushing of many different tribal nations. So here, what I have featured on this slide is the Oscar Liebhardt Preserve. This is connected to the Susquehannock tribe. And here there were many, many trade goods found, including these different metal implements, as well as beads. Kettles were very popular for trade. And so we're starting to see widespread adoption of those new technologies. Now we have other woodland and contact period sites across Pennsylvania. I list some of them here, so it's not just Monongahela or Susquehannock focused. One in particular, where these images are from, is the Queen Esther's Town Preserve. This is in north central Pennsylvania along the Susquehanna River. And very interesting because I think a lot of times we think, oh, pre-contact, we think before Europeans, but of course, these native folks are still around and they were still around during the contact period. So at this particular property, there was a large village site that was led by Queen Esther, who was thought to be of French and Native American ancestry, a very influential figure who ultimately presided over a village of reportedly 70 houses, herds of cattle, very extensive town at this point, right? Now, this town unfortunately was targeted during General John Sullivan's campaign against the Haudenosaunee or the Six Nations in the later 1700s, Revolutionary War era. But there's not much we know about it archaeologically, right? We have a lot of historic records that tell us about it. But what's exciting is now that we've acquired about 100 acres that protect this area, we've had research go on led by Binghamton University to really understand how were these people living, right? As things were changing with European contact, were they changing housing styles? What types of artifacts were they using? How were they living? So that's been a really exciting project. And then we have sites that are outside of the general timeline. So briefly, quarry sites, places where people are returning to get chert, jasper, quartz, quartzite, rhyolite. King's Quarry in Pennsylvania is one in particular. It was a large jasper quarry site. And then pre-contact earthworks, we have Dingfelder Circle here in Pennsylvania, which we don't know very much about. We do know it's an earthen ring. And so hopefully one day somebody will want to do some research out there to tell us a little bit more about it. And of course, we have historic sites. There is a rich tradition of historical archaeology in the East. We think of places like Plymouth and Williamsburg, Philadelphia, and we have more written records, but of course, they just don't cover all the people who were living during this time period. There are so many different populations coming in, and we get a lot of different types of sites. So this ranges from colonial sites, like the Kippax Plantation site. This is just outside of Richmond, has different periods of occupation dating from the 17th through the 19th centuries. And I like to show this one because you can see here in the photo on the left, we managed to protect about 10 acres, this little oasis in the middle of a very highly developed area. So we're not always working in a rural setting. Sometimes we're right in the middle of urban development. And importantly, a lot of these historic sites are multi-component, right? So it's not just the colonial uh, settlers who are coming in or the plantation owners, but we also have African Americans. We know at Kippax there were enslaved Africans. The slave quarters have been excavated archaeologically. And we know there's also an interesting pre-contact Native, or excuse me, not pre-contact, but historic Native American component because this was along a major trading route. So we see lots of beads, we see trade guns that are being stored at the plantation to trade with local native tribes. So again, a lot of these sites are very multi-layered, have a lot of different things that are going on. We also have industrial sites, and these vary from places like the Pamplin Pipe Factory, which is in central Virginia, where the local clay deposits were perfect for making these clay smoking pipes, all the way to huge industrial furnace complexes. So in Pennsylvania, we've protected the Big Pond furnace. This is located just outside of the Michaud State Forest and was one of very, very many operations for producing iron, right? And so Michaud State Forest itself has all sorts of different charcoal pits for producing charcoal to fuel these furnaces. And importantly, these aren't just there to understand how the furnace worked or how the actual technology worked, but to understand the lives of the people who were working in these places. So often there are larger complexes that include a furnace, but also have workers' housing or overseers' housing or somebody living there. And so we can use archaeology to get a new lens on the lives of those people who maybe didn't have a whole lot written about them. So it's not just understanding how the industry operated itself, it's the people behind the industry. And we also have religious sites. So again, not only are we learning about the practicing of religion in this country, whether it's a place like Upper Lunenburg Episcopal Church, this is a 17th century church down in Virginia, or a 19th, 20th century Jewish immigrant settlement that we've acquired in Connecticut, we're understanding how these religious places served other purposes for these communities as well, right? So people are making big decisions here. It's a gathering place. We can learn a lot more other than just how are these people practicing religion. Though again, that's also an important aspect for understanding these communities and how they maintained identities, how they adapted to surrounding influences, especially when we're looking at later immigrant communities. So thinking about this Jewish site in Connecticut, which maintained a lot of traditional practice, uh, despite being surrounded by more American culture getting into the 19th and 20th century, and what they maintained and what they changed. And then last but not least, of course, military sites. We are no strangers to all the different types of conflict here in the Eastern region, from early rebellions to the French and Indian War, American Revolutionary War, Civil War, War of 1812. These things leave a large archaeological record, right? We have a lot of battlefields, we have a lot of fort sites, we have a lot of support sites for these different places. And so in Pennsylvania, we've looked at a lot of frontier forts that date to the French and Indian War period, as there was a chain of forts constructed across what was the western frontier at that time in 1755 in an effort to take Fort Duquesne, what is now Fort Pitt, of course, Pittsburgh, from the French. So it's been really interesting to pursue these different forts. Many of them have been located, some of them are in better shape than others. And there's some really wonderful ongoing work by Jonathan Burns, who's been working out at Fort Halifax for the past couple of years. And also, he helped us out at Fort Littleton, which is a property that we acquired in Fulton County, one of these forts. And so, again, you have not only the military installation, but a lot of times you had a support village as well, right? Because the military needed blacksmiths, they needed support structures for the men who are living at these forts. And so, there's often much more to these sites than just the fort itself. Okay, and so I know that's a real quick overview of a lot of different time periods and a lot of different types of sites, but we really aim to protect a diversity of sites that reflect the very interesting history of this country and the broad history. So I wanted to give you all a crash course in what that looks like. And then what I wanted to do to close out was highlight one of our properties that is open to the public for visitors and actually has amenities and trails and things like that. Because again, I get requests to visit our properties, and most of them just look like woodlots or field lots. There's not much to see, but this one is very different. So this is the Ebert Spring Archaeological Preserve and Heritage Park. It is in south central Pennsylvania. So if you happen to be relatively close to there, this is a great spot. It's open dawn to dusk where you can come and visit and learn a bit about what we've protected. So again, right smack in the middle, the Great Valley province of Pennsylvania. And what drew us to this area? Well, the Ebert Spring site is a multi-component, it's really not just one site, it's a number of sites dating from the Paleoindian period all the way up through the founding of Antrim Township. So pretty much has something from every single time period just about that I just spoke about. And importantly, it really changed the way archaeologists understand pre-contact indigenous settlement in the region, because for so long we were looking along major waterways, and the sites in this area in the Great Valley here are often focused on these huge limestone springs, right? So it's a karst landscape, there's a lot of limestone, there are underground springs, and that's where many of these large sites are located, like Ebert Spring. We have later occupations because that spring made it a great place for the early founder to set up where he would live. And then also was a great spot for a frontier fort. And we think Fort Allison was located on this property. And really, we're just looking at a tremendous time depth and a very, very rich archaeological record. So Ebert Spring, as I said, this is a karst landscape. We have limestone all over the place. This spring puts out more than 600 gallons of water a minute. So you can imagine this was the place to be for thousands of years. This is where animals are going to come. You can follow your game here. It's a great place to live. And goodness, the local town still draws part of its water supply from here. So an incredible natural resource. Now, the challenge is this incredible natural resource happens to be located right in the thick of really dense industrial development. So you can see in that red circle, that's where the sites are located. And many of these buildings in this plan have either been constructed or will be constructed soon. So it will be totally surrounded, but gives an idea of what preservation looks like sometimes. Sometimes it's these little pocket sites where we protect what we can and provide a little bit of an oasis in the midst of development. And the reason this area is so popular, again, if you're not familiar with this part of Pennsylvania, it's right where Interstate 81 runs north of the Maryland border. And it's also a major hub along the Norfolk Southern Railway. So, a really popular spot to put your warehouses. It makes sense. I understand it. But unfortunately, there were many archaeological sites in this area as well. So, we're up against that. But fortunately, there are individuals like Al Bunnell who lived in the house that is on this property for many, many years and was very passionate as an amateur archaeologist. He was a member of a local chapter of the Society for Pennsylvania Archaeology and routinely had seasonal digs on the site to better understand the site. And he really wanted to see this place protected and held out for a very long time against the developers. So we owe a lot to him for that effort. Now, I'll keep this brief, but we pieced together different properties in this area over many, many years. Some of it came from preservation related to mitigation for development. Some of it was working with Al Bunnell's son to make sure that property was protected. And some of it was partnering with developers who were willing to donate land in exchange for using the driveway as an access point and so on. So it was a long and complicated process where you can see all these very oddly shaped pieces coming together to form a 12.5 acre park. Unfortunately, this aerial photo, I need to get an updated one in here. This park is now even more surrounded by development. But when you go to this spot, and again, it's amazing to drive back there and feel like you're actually not surrounded by development. It's well forested. You can see the Allison Ebert house that dates to, or at least part of it dates to 1756. You can see the spring house, which we think is part of Fort Allison, not the upper brick portion, but the lower stone portion. And you can get a sense of just how tremendous the spring is, right? You can see the output there. And what you can't see so much because there aren't active excavations at this time, but under the ground is a tremendous record of pre-contact occupation on this site. So there were fire hearths that were excavated, a lot of ceramics. In the surrounding fields, there were a lot of different types of points that were recovered. We have pottery, and then we move into the historic period where you can see this stockade, which again we think is possibly part of Fort Allison, gunflints, and other records of that long-term use of the property. And so this was a difficult project that took many, many years, and we're really grateful that we had state support. We were able to get grant funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We got funding from Antrim Township, and then we had partners and still continue to work with those partners, including Antrim Township to help maintain the property and the Allison Antrim History Museum, who maintains and leases the house and other structures on the property. And again, other grantors, the South Mountain Partnership. We worked with the school district as well, because this really was a community focused project. And we took Al's house, which was not in terrible shape. He kept it up very, very well, but there's only so much he could do in his advanced age, and turned it into an accessible public park. Now, there is a tenant who stays in part of the house, and the house is only open sporadically throughout the year, but the grounds are open on a daily basis. And you can come, you can walk the trails. We have a lot of interpretive kiosks that are out that talk about all the different time periods and showcase artifacts from the site. Um, you can visit the spring house. I tell people to come out all different seasons. It's also an oasis for wildlife. So we have a lot of ecological preservation along with cultural preservation. And again, it's a place you can go to actually really learn about the work that we're doing and learn about these resources. And there's a couple of miles of trails, so I highly recommend checking it out. It's a great way for us to showcase our work. And additionally, we developed a scavenger hunt that was really, really popular with parents during COVID who were looking to bring their kids out to do something educational, a teaching guide, and we have a Facebook page. So you can always check out if we have anything going on there. So again, just one of 90 properties here in the East, but there's so much to learn just at this one place, and I really like to share it with people since you're able to visit it. So, to close out, I just wanted to say if you're interested in learning more about our work or you just happen to love archaeology, please check us out online. We have a very active social media, we have a brand new website, and we really have a lot of content on our YouTube channel as well. We routinely do lectures with archaeologists that cover topics all across the country, so not just here in the East, but I strongly encourage you to take a look and just learn a little bit more about the work that we do. So thank you all so, so very much. Thanks for having me. I hope this was interesting and educational for you guys, and I look forward to hearing some questions, but feel free to reach out as well.
So we do have some questions from the audience, Kelley. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah,
The
great.
first one is, when you were discussing finding sites, you mentioned CRM. What does CRM stand for?
Oh, that is a great question. Thank you for catching me on that. CRM stands for Cultural Resource Management, and it's the term that is used to refer to the industry of archaeological testing that has to do with testing requirements in advance of development or other ground disturbance. So if you have a development project that requires permitting, especially federal permitting, like a wetlands permit through the Army Corps, you are required by federal law to undertake archaeological testing. CRM firms, cultural resource management firms, are businesses that specialize in that type of testing. So it's a bit more of the industrial side of archaeology, but it's also where most archaeologists work. That's where most of the work is in doing that testing as part of compliance projects. So I apologize for using the shorthand for that, but yes, that's cultural resource management is that sector of archaeology.
Well, we have another explanation needed. What
Okay,
is an earthen ring? You mentioned
great.
one located in Erie, and the other part of it is,
Yes.
why hasn't it been studied? You mentioned it has not yet been studied.
Yes. So Dingfelder Circle, when we call it an earthen ring, it is literally that. It's a circle of soil where dirt has been piled up in a ring shape. Uh, it's about, it's harder to see, of course, over time. It has eroded and washed down, but about 2 feet high. And so it was looked at in the 1930s, as best as we know, as part of a WPA project, um, Works Progress Administration project, but we don't have any records from that. So we don't know what they found. We know the farmer who owned it before has found some artifacts out there. And the reason it hasn't been studied is because no researcher has approached us about doing a project out there. And so there isn't an archaeologist that's necessarily working on earthen rings in the northwestern part of the state that is seeking to do that type of work. But that's okay. We will make sure it's protected until the time is right. I think it would be great for somebody to do some ground penetrating radar out there to just get a better idea of what other earthen landforms might have been created that we can no longer see because of the accumulation of materials over time. So that's what I mean by earthen ring. It's just a slightly raised ring of dirt that was clearly arranged by people many, many years ago for a reason that we don't know. It could have been a defensive, maybe they had a palisade built into that earthen ring. Maybe it was ceremonial. We don't know until we have somebody who's interested in taking a further look at it. So we'll wait until that time comes, and I would love to know more about it as well.
So what happens to the recovered artifacts at the sites? Are they stored? Are they reburied or on display somewhere?
Yeah, it's part of our management guidelines to ensure that any artifacts that are excavated from an archaeological conservancy preserve are then curated at an appropriate repository. So this can be a state museum, it can be a local museum, somewhere where they have a facility that meets curatorial standards. So we want to make sure that the artifacts are stored safely and properly, but also are accessible for future research or for public education. So every site is a little bit different, but we require researchers to make those arrangements prior to even putting a shovel in the ground because we want to make sure, again, the focus is any research that happens on these properties needs to be for the public benefit, needs to have the ability for people to access these resources. And so, in general, they're often going to state facilities, but in some cases, we do have local museums who curate collections from these sites as well.
Are there volunteer opportunities with the Archaeological Conservancy on projects or excavations?
Yes, I would say there are two buckets of opportunities. The challenge is they really vary geographically. So the first one is serving as a site steward. So I cannot be in 90 places at once. I cannot check on these properties myself every day. So I often work with neighbors, local archaeologists or archaeological chapters, farmers, hunters, people who live in the area that can just help keep an eye on these places. And they can call me if they say, hey, somebody knocked the fence down, the fence needs to be repaired, or somebody's out there who shouldn't be out there. So we have a lot of volunteer site stewards. As far as actual archaeology and excavation goes, we really encourage researchers who apply to work on our properties to have a public outreach component, whether that's doing lectures or actually having volunteers on site. So, for example, the excavations that just took place at the Barton Preserve, which is in Western Maryland, had volunteers from the Archaeological Society of Maryland out there every single day, which is wonderful because then you have more hands to help screen. Everybody gets to learn more about the site, and it has that public component. So the challenge of that is we don't always have excavations going on. So you just have to stay tuned and follow our socials to see where we might have a research project taking place that is open to volunteers. Because we don't run the excavations ourselves. We have researchers who apply to do work on these properties. And so it's not like we're out there soliciting for it to happen every single year. But keep an eye out. And in particular, depending on where you live, you're always welcome, well, in this case, you're likely in Pennsylvania, so you're welcome to contact me to ask, hey, do you know of anything in the area? I'm happy to give suggestions as well.
So if someone thinks they have a site that the Archaeological Conservancy might be interested
Mhm.
in, how should they contact you?
You can call me, you can email me, you can send me a letter via snail mail. You can, uh, however works for you to get in touch. It's helpful to know location. So if you have a property map or can share your address and then explain a little bit about what the site is, what you know about it. Because we have to separate. We get a lot of people who might think they have a site, but it might be old fieldstone, rock piles, or something like that versus actual recorded sites. But yeah, I'm always happy to get those sorts of letters or messages. So feel free to reach out. Let me know what you think we have. And if it seems like something that would be a good fit, we'll keep in touch and follow up.
So thank you to the audience for your questions. If you have further questions, you can contact Kelley directly. So Kelley, what would you like the audience to remember from today's presentation?
Oh, well, there's no quiz, so you don't have to remember all of it. But I think the biggest thing is that there are archaeological sites everywhere, right? And, and once you think archaeologically, it's hard to drive down the road, especially for me, and not think, oh, there's a site down there by the river, or oh, that would be a great spot for this. So I want people to be aware that there are sites everywhere. They're in your own backyard. They're all across the state of Pennsylvania. And what's really important is having that awareness and raising that awareness with other people as well in order to try to make sure more of these places stay protected. Because we lose a lot of sites without ever knowing what they contained to development and to other factors. And so that's my big thing is sites, they're all over the place. We need more people to think about them and raise awareness so we can hopefully protect or at least study more of them.
Thank you again for today's presentation.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Please join us again for more virtual Archaeology Learn at Lunchtime programs during October. Visit the State Museum of Pennsylvania's website at statemuseumpa.org for program information and to sign up.